The 2023 Dallas Mavericks have been the biggest disappointment in the NBA this season. It saw one of the best players in the league in Luka Doncic sitting on the sidelines watching the NBA playoffs. While at the beginning of the season he was thought to have had a playoff-ready team built around him. With them bringing in big men like Christian Wood and JaVale McGee, it looked like they had pieces that could take them to the next level. But unfortunately for the Mavs, they let Jalen Brunson go in the 2022 offseason, which turned out to be the biggest factor in their decline this season. You see, Jalen Brunson was a role player off the bench for them just 2 years ago. Last year he became a full-time starter and a key piece to their postseason with his ability to take a large part of the role off of Luka Doncic on the offensive end. He was able to score and play make, which took the pressure off their superstar for half the game. And as a 25-year-old up-and-coming star, they should have done everything they could to keep him. When a team has a young superstar like Luka, when they come across a player that meshes well with them, it's their job to do everything they can and pay that player, because that's how championship teams are built. And that's especially true when both guys are about the same age. But the Mavericks chose not to, and while they've been sitting at home after the season, they've had to watch Jalen Brunson become a star and lead his New York Knicks into the second round of the playoffs. And it's no doubt that he's been the difference maker for both teams. For Dallas, they finished with a 52-30 record last year and made the Western Conference Finals. And it was no coincidence that overall the rest of the roster got better this year, but without Brunson, they now finished 38-44, made the 11th seed, and didn't make the postseason. While the other side of that is the fact that last season the Knicks finished with a 37-45 record, which was the 11th seed. Then with little to no changes to the team, they signed Jalen and now finished 47-35, which is the 5th seed, and are in the second round. So both teams with him finish amongst the top of the conference, and without him are 11 seeds. But not only that, I mentioned earlier how he played well with Luka, so the Mavs should have kept him. Well, he not only played well with him, he was actually the perfect second option. And that's apparently hard to come across, seeing how poorly he's played alongside Porzingis and now Kyrie. The fact that Kyrie Irving is the better overall player and even better statistically, but still didn't give the Mavericks the same success exactly proves my point. I mean, he averaged 27 a game playing next to Doncic, but as a team, these two only led Dallas to a 5-13 record. And it's not only that, but they had to give up 2 players and 3 picks to get him. So they now find themselves down Jalen Brunson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Spencer Dinwiddie, a first-round pick, and 2 seconds. But there's more, because assuming Kyrie signs elsewhere this offseason, they're now without him too. So things are just starting to look worse and worse in Texas. As for where Jalen's at now, well, he jumped up this year to averaging 24-6 and nearly career highs across the board, with no signs of slowing down anytime soon. He looks like he's just gonna get better and better and fit right in with the Knicks, which means the better he continues to play, the more the Mavericks will be missing out on. So why exactly did they let him walk? Well, it all boils down to the fact that they had multiple chances to sign him to a 4-year, $55 million contract extension, but they didn't. They could have offered him that deal in the 2021 offseason, which was right before his breakout year. If you want to give the team a pass here, it's understandable. He was still a bench player at the time, so they didn't know. But my opinion is it's their job to know how good their players are going to become. But none of this even matters, because even after he broke out and started averaging 17, 5, and 4, Jalen's father came out and said that if they still offered him that extension, he'd accept it. He could get more in free agency, but right now we just want the security, and he wants to call it home here. But then the Mavericks still don't offer him the deal, and instead he signs a $100 million contract with the Knicks in the offseason. They could have gotten this man for a bargain, which not only would have been a great move, but think of the impact it would have had on the rest of the team for the next 4 years. That basically would have given them $50 million extra over the next few years to go and spend on the rest of their potential championship roster. And that's how title contending teams are built. I mean, a similar scenario like that is what led to the start of the Golden State Warriors dynasty, as well as them having enough money to bring in Kevin Durant a couple years into it, because the Warriors signed Steph Curry to a cheap contract basically right before his career blew up. And over the next 4 years, they had him locked into making limited money that they were able to spend elsewhere across the team. Just imagine the Warriors choosing not to give Curry any money at all. He goes and signs with a different team and becomes an all-time great. Of course, the Jalen Brunson situation is on a much smaller scale, but you get the idea of how bad the Mavericks messed up. Now, of course, I have to mention the fact that the Knicks played dirty and did steal him away. During the first round of the playoffs when Brunson was still on the Mavs, Knicks executives alongside Julius Randle sat courtside to watch Brunson play. Then a couple of months later, the team hired his father to be an assistant coach, which clearly was only done to help bring him in, and seeing that he signed with the team on the first day of free agency, it worked. The league actually found them guilty of tampering too, but only took away a second round pick from them. But once again, Dallas still could have offered him a better deal than New York did, but they chose not to. So is it really anyone else's fault but their own? But then again, with all this talk about Jalen Brunson leaving the Mavericks, he's still only one player. I think we need to take a little bit of a closer look at Luka Doncic, because he's a guy that's supposed supposed to be the league's next superstar, a potential MVP every year, and in the argument for the league's best player. Yet he couldn't even lead his team to the postseason. And as I've mentioned, he couldn't seem to work it out with either of Kristaps Porzingis or Kyrie Irving. So it begs the question of, is there actually a Luka Doncic problem? From his inability to play off the ball to his lackluster defense, combined with his ball dominance, could that be what's holding the team back? And holding him back from playing with certain players or other all-star caliber players? I don't really think that's the case or it has much to do with it. Whether those arguments are true or not is besides the point. The man averaged 32, 8, and 8 on 50% shooting and 34% from 3 at 23 years old. There's not much more he could do, and the fact that his team still didn't succeed is due to a team effort and not just him. The team just has to be constructed a certain way around him, and it's not there right now. His inability to play with Porzingis was more on Porzingis, and the fact that himself and Kyrie Irving didn't work was more just a clash of styles, and that they only played around 20 games together. Necessarily, I don't think the team really did anything wrong this year either. I think they constructed a great overall roster, and the fact that they brought in big men like Christian Wood and JaVale McGee was great, but they really suffered on the defensive end. Dallas had the 6th highest offensive rating in the league this year, but the 6th worst defensive rating, only behind the Spurs, Rockets, and Pistons, who were all tanking, and the Blazers and Pacers. So if the talent they brought in didn't work and they're gonna need a lot more help on defense, what does a winning team look like in Dallas? What kind of roster does Luka Doncic need to play with in order to succeed? Well, let's break it down like this. I think he needs a guard in the backcourt with him that can score and make plays. They need a shooter and preferably a 3-and-D guy at small forward to spread the floor. At power forward, I'd be looking for an Aaron Gordon type player that can lock up the other team's best player no matter what position they're at. And then he's just gotta have a quality big man to play with, something he hasn't had yet in his career. Yeah, sure, there was Porzingis, but he didn't really play like a big man, he just mainly sat around the 3-point line. So luckily for the Mavs, they have about $70 million coming off their books going into this offseason that's filled with a good amount of free agents. So if we want to fill in some of these gaps, I think we have to start with signing Jeremy Grant at power forward. He's the go-to guy that can stretch the floor and always guard the other team's best player, at least the 1 through 4 when needed. A guy like Jay Crowder or Victor Oladipo could fill in as the 3-and-D player quite nicely, and if they sign Jay, he could be the guy to step in and protect Luka when needed. I think the unrestricted free agent Nikola Vucevic could fit in perfectly at center. To play on that team, I think the center has to be able to stretch the floor in order to clear the lane and spread out the defense. Plus, with the Spanish connection between him and Luka, he could be the perfect signing. And as for a guard in the backcourt with him, that's tough because there's not many people out there in the free agency market this year to fill that role for them, which is hard because it's Jalen Brunson's old position that they need to fill most. They do already have Tim Hardaway on the team, as well as guys like Seth Curry and Josh Hart who they could sign, so there's still hope. And I know there's probably better scenarios out there for who they should sign or trade for at every position. This was just a quick breakdown and suggestions of the type of roster I think they could benefit from. All I'm saying is the team has a lot of work to do this offseason, and even more work down the line if they want to keep Luka Doncic happy and bring his smile back. So let's see if they can do it before it's too late.